I was born in Hong Kong, and my family moved to the States in 1973 in anticipation of Hong Kong reverting back to communist China. And in my whole family's desire to assimilate into this new land, I neglected my own language and culture in order to be accepted, to fit into white society. I still remember being taunted in elementary school by fellow students, Chinese, Japanese, dirty knees, look at these. It was quite rude. And in Shreveport, we lived in a declining middle-class neighborhood. My parents sold their home for $10,000 in 2001. We never had any problems with our black neighbors. Yet, one summer evening, we heard a knock on our front door, and there was a black man whose car had broken down and just needed a phone to call for help. And yet, we pretended that we weren't home. We just waited quietly until he left for another house. And looking back, it was so clear to me that even as a 12-year-old first-generation immigrant, I was already fully conditioned by whiteness, sharing the same thought patterns of fear and distrust of black men who were literally our neighbors. I might not have had hateful thoughts toward blacks, but I harbored implicit bias against people of color. And years afterwards, I wrote a devotion on the parable of the Good Samaritan, comparing my family to the Levites and the priests, who encountered a neighbor in need and intentionally ignored him and walked our way on the other side of the road. Well, growing up, I willingly allowed the white culture to mold me into the preferred image of the model Asian immigrant. Smart, hardworking, always smiling, not making waves. When you hear me speak, you probably won't hear a Chinese accent, and that confuses people sometimes. When I told an acquaintance that I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, his eyes lit up with recognition and said, "Oh, you're a Cajun." I'm not a Cajun. But am I an Asian? It was in college that I first encountered big groups of Chinese peers. They invited me to their clubs, to the Chinese Student Association, but I did not join. I identify more with whites. And looking back, I have benefited by assimilating into white culture. I have a BA from Rice University, a Master's of Divinity from Southwestern Seminary, a doctorate from UVA. I have not been discriminated from housing or jobs. Yet I distinctly remember asking the Farmville Baptist Search Committee whether they thought that it would be a problem for them to call a Chinese pastor. And they assured me that it wouldn't be a problem, and for the most part, they were right. However, I do remember one church member telling me that he had a hard time understanding my sermons because of my Chinese accent. So, I guess there's always one in every crowd. Farmville, where I served as pastor of Farmville Baptist Church for over 7 years, is the seat of Prince Edward County, the county that closed down the public schools for 5 years, from 59 to 64, and diverted tax money to establish a white academy. Some Farmville Baptist members supported that move. Another church member serving on the town council opposed it, and he paid a big social price. Later, the church erected an informal policy of not allowing blacks to be on the property. And in 1969, it led to the arrest of civil rights protesters, including the Reverend J. Samuel Williams, Jr., an activist and pastor of Levy Baptist Church in Farmville. In my time as pastor in Farmville, I befriended Reverend Williams, and I even offered a public apology to him at a symposium on the Prince Edward school closing. And I was able to do that and not get fired because I had several church members who had my back. Even so, I did not have the courage to formally lead my church, to critically examine our own history, to have congregational conversations around our racist policies, and to reveal stories that we had spent decades hiding and denying from our communities, but probably more importantly, from ourselves. And during my time at Farmville Baptist, the church partnered with several black churches in town for meals and pulpit exchanges, for Easter services, even joint vacation Bible schools. We were anxious to show the community that just how much we had changed. We told people we now had a black couple who joined as members, how we now welcome black people into our space to eat our food, to sing our hymns, to read our liturgies. And we were happy that these exchanges took place at Farmville Baptist. But if we were honest with ourselves, we should have also admitted that we were much less open to attend events at black churches as their guests. My members told me that black worship services were too long, too loud, too different than what they were used to. But at least we could tell ourselves that we're welcoming, that we have black friends, that we weren't racist. And yet, having served in that congregation, I am deeply grateful for members of Farmville Baptist for helping me learn and grow as a pastor, not only in my church, but also in my community. And I know that they, like me, have continued their journey of growth. But it was only after coming back to Charlottesville that I began to learn that undoing racism is not just about being nice to one another. It is also about dismantling the racial power dynamics in our systems, our institutions, and culture that privilege white people. And through conversations with other faith leaders within the clergy collective and others, I'm learning that church integration is not the goal of our work. Because we can have congregations integrated with diverse races, but once worshipers leave our buildings, black people still experience the disparities of worse education and health outcomes, of lower employment rates and salary incomes, of higher rates of arrest and incarceration. In fact, in our dangerous and oppressive society, black churches may be the only place where black people feel safe to cry out their sorrows, to sing their joys, to dance with the movement of the Spirit, to be free from the shackles of an European understanding of time or propriety. And it is with this understanding, still growing, that I say, thank God more white people aren't worshiping in black churches. Because if we did, we might very well ruin a good thing for black people. And Sunday mornings will always remain the most segregated hour of the week as long as our society is unjust and oppressive for blacks and people of color. Having said that, during these past several years, my wife and I have had the privilege of worshiping in black churches, of going into their space, eating their food, singing their songs, and not reading any liturgies at all. We have been welcomed with open arms, with gracious hospitality. And I am learning that instead of asking Black people to come into our churches or even to events like this so they can teach or perform for us, we should, with their invitation, simply show up humbly to their spaces where they have the power. They have control of whether or not they want to speak about their experiences. And in the meantime, we have the responsibility of teaching ourselves about the Black experience, learning about our own racial history through books and internet resources, podcasts, workshops, so much more. Black people are not at our beck and call to teach us what we could and should learn for ourselves. And so I still have much to learn, so much to grow, and I'm so grateful for the patience and the good humor of my Black brothers and sisters who have allowed me to show up again and again in their lives to experience their strength, their wisdom, their resourcefulness, and their resiliency. And my journey of learning and growing is not over, and I am so grateful for the company of any other pilgrims along this path. Thank you for sharing my story, for letting me share my story.